Hi everyone, welcome to my on-demand for Wednesday, March 11th. Our lesson title is Chopin, and that's how you pronounce his name. That's Schroeder at the piano from Peanuts. Our objectives: Schroeder used to like to play a lot of Chopin. You'll be identifying Chopin as a composer during the Romantic era. You will hear the music of Chopin, define Polonaise, and compare the harpsichord to the piano. You will also identify the growth of the orchestra and the perfection of the piano as elements of the Romantic era. Normally I would be playing for you Chopin's Militaire Polonaise. That is located in Brain Honey for you. Our vocabulary, it's a review from last class. The Romantic era is a period of musical history that included most of the 19th century. Composers of the Romantic era were interested in expressing emotions in music rather than following forms. Brahms and Wagner, remember we talked about Richard Wagner last week? We pronounce his name with a V because he was German. They were two famous composers of the Romantic era. We're talking about Romantic music that came into its own at the beginning of the 19th century. Music from this era sounds almost boundless and free from any limitations of form. Much of this music is programmatic. That is, it is meant to describe something, perhaps a scene in nature, or a particular feeling, or it tells a story. Frédéric Chopin. He was one of the greatest composers of music for the piano. He was born in a town just outside of Warsaw, Poland. His mother introduced him to the piano, giving him lessons at a very early age. Chopin played extremely well and gave his first concert at the age of 8. He also enjoyed writing music. By the time he was 7, he had composed 2 polonaises. Chopin's music included traditional pieces for the piano of his time, such as concertos, sonatas, waltzes, and preludes. However, he also introduced some non-traditional forms that included the etude, nocturne, and ballad, as well as the mazurka and polonaise, which are dances from Poland. They feature rich, energetic rhythms and harmonies. The Polonaise was one of Chopin's favorites, and the Military Polonaise was written in 1838. That's one of his most famous works in this genre. Technically, a Polonaise is not a dance, but rather a promenade or a procession that was often played as couples entered a ballroom. Unlike many child prodigies, Chopin grew in popularity throughout his career as a pianist, teacher, and composer, although his early fame came while he was in Poland as a youth. At age 20, he began to travel in Europe after graduating from high school, and eventually he settled in Paris. Chopin never returned to his native land, but he also never forgot it. He was never healthy, and at age 39, he was only 39 when he died of tuberculosis. When he was buried in France, a special box of earth was brought from Poland to sprinkle on his grave. See, everyone knew how much he loved his country, so they brought a box of dirt from Poland to sprinkle on his grave to show the love for his country. Our vocabulary today is the Polonaise, which is a stately Polish dance in 3/4 time, originally performed for court processions and ceremonies. It was often used as a processional for military men or military couples entering a ballroom. This was one of Chopin's favorite musical forms. He wrote his first Polonaise when he was only 7 years old and continued to write Polonaises throughout his life. The Military Polonaise was composed in October of 1838 and published in December of 1840. No other great composer concentrated so exclusively on one instrument as Chopin did on the piano. Moreover, most of his output for the piano was confined to relatively short pieces. But within these limits, Chopin poured out a steady stream of wonderful, inspired music. Passionate, stormy, happy, sad, dreamily reflective, and rich in melody. At the same time, his music is always perfectly judged in terms of form and technical style. Two things shaped the course of music through the Romantic period of the 19th century. One was the growth of the orchestra that we talked about last week. The other was the development of the piano into an instrument whose variety of tones set it apart from the harpsichord, and which began to resemble today's concert grand. The harpsichord is a keyboard instrument that was an ancestor of the piano. When the keys are pressed, the strings are plucked by the quills. Because of this, it is nearly impossible to make changes in dynamics playing the harpsichord. We've talked about this in here before. Now, the piano is a stringed instrument. Its strings are struck by hammers, which are connected to the keys. There's 88 keys on a modern piano. Each one is a different note. It was originally called the pianoforte because it could play both soft, which means piano, and loud, which means forte in music. Instruments of the orchestra. The keyboard instruments are often classified as percussion instruments because they play a rhythmic role in some music. However, most keyboard instruments are not true members of the percussion family, because their sound is not produced by the vibration of a membrane or a solid material, like a drum. The piano sound is produced on the piano by small hammers striking strings. The hammers are controlled mechanically and strike the strings when the player's hands press the piano keys. If you go to the website, you'll be able to hear the piano, and if you go to that website, you'll be able to click on it and hear the harpsichord. Normally, we would talk about how they are the same and how they are different. Obviously, the harpsichord, the one on the right, has 2 layers of keys, whereas the piano only has 1. The piano has pedals, the harpsichord doesn't. And the piano is, when you press a key, it is a little hammer comes up and strikes one of the strings, whereas the harpsichord, the strings are plucked. There's also oh wait, I have another, oh, here it is. There's a Beethoven and Chopin composed for the piano movie clip. And you're to think about what did Chopin think of when he composed the Minuet Waltz, and then watch the clavichord and the harpsichord, and think about what was different about the harpsichord and clavichord, other than the sound, of course. Many composers of the Romantic period, Beethoven, Schumann, Mendelssohn, and Liszt, regarded the piano as their favorite instrument, but nobody understood it better than Chopin. He could make the piano sound more truly romantic and poetic than anybody else. He also wrote for it more sympathetically than any other composer. Normally, we would go into breakout rooms and answer the following questions. A keyboard instrument that was an ancestor of the piano. When the keys are pressed, the strings are plucked by quills, and that would be the harpsichord. Number 2, a stately dance in 3/4 time, often used as a military promenade for military men or couples entering a ballroom. That would be the polonaise. Number 3, during the Romantic era, the size of the orchestra increased. We talked about that also last week. Number 4, program music is meant to describe something, perhaps a scene in nature or a particular feeling, or it tells a story. That is true. And number 5, Chopin did not compose any music for the piano. Well, obviously that is false. Chopin loved the piano. Closure, true or false? Chopin was a Romantic era composer. Hopefully you know that that one is true. So your assignment, there's a Chopin quiz located in Brain Honey. It is due March 18th. There's the 2 movie clips from class, and there's also the Military Polonaise by Chopin that you may listen to. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next Wednesday.